and start with custom integrations. In order to broach the subject of custom integrations, we need to talk about REST API. So maybe this is completely common knowledge for you, maybe it's not, it doesn't matter. I'll give just a brief intro of how I see it. I mean, you can also Google it if you want more information on what it is. You'll find a lot of resources online. It's essentially a way to access resources on an API. What's an API? It's an application programming interface. So it's something that allows you to communicate with a program. And a REST API is a standard for that. It's a certain way to do it. And it's a very common way to do it. Actually, it's the most prevalent way to do it on the web and between applications nowadays. You'll hear this term a lot. So when you hear that an app makes a request to a server, or when a user logs in and communicates with a server, adds an item of data, reads data, it's usually through a REST API. There are also systems where you don't necessarily use a REST API. The system itself is generating the user interface for you. But in this case, the way we work with apps and systems, we use the REST API, and this is what I'll be covering today. So it's possible, the possible requests that you're making to this API, this server, this external system, they need to be requests that are defined. You can't just ask it anything. It's something that someone has to define. It's someone that someone has to handle. So usually when they're intended for public use, they come with documentation, and they explain to you what the structure of the request is and what you're going to get as a result, and you have ways to test it. So it's a pretty common thing. I can give an example relating to our system. I was explaining the concept of datasets, which is a store of items, like an Excel sheet, but in the cloud. And it has an API, which is how our apps communicate with it, where you're able to get the items. You're able to create an item, update an item, delete an item. I'm going to use this example because it relates to what we've done in the previous webinar. All right, and this is just, I have taken the definition from Red Hat, and I forgot to put the source. I'm sorry about that. I will put the source below, where they say a REST API, also known as RESTful API, is an application programming interface that conforms to the constraints of REST architectural style and allows for interaction with RESTful web services. So it's more like two concepts together. So REST. I'm getting into this. It's getting maybe a bit technical, but it's important because you might have to mess around with this if you want to do some integrating. What does a request look like? Typically, the most basic forms of request have some sort of domain name and a path. So in our case, it would be Appspotr, appspotr.com/dataset/something, something, something. It's the same like you see a URL to a website, the link to a website, that is the main part of it, like appspotr.com or facebook.com or something.com. That's what we call the domain, which is the main thing. And then the path is the little pieces after that describe where we're going. And then you can add data, because sometimes it's important when you're requesting something to give additional data. We call these query parameters. I'll show you what they look like. And then you have different types of requests depending what you're doing. Get, they're pretty self-explanatory. So get, you can get something. Post, you can create something. Patch, you can update something. Delete, you can delete something. There are other methods. And this is, again, just a standard. So they don't necessarily have to do what they say. It's just that systems should be built using this standard and this way of doing it. There are other methods as well. When you Google it, you'll see there's way more other types of requests you can make. But these are the ones I'll be focusing on today and the ones that we'll be using. In a request, there sometimes needs to be additional data just to say, hey, for example, I would like the data that I'm requesting to be in XML format or in JSON format. We'll be using JSON format for our demo. And then a lot of APIs put the authentication part of it, like a token or a secret inside the header itself with the request. to authorize, because otherwise anyone could make this request, right? Any system could randomly make a request. And then we have what we call the body. Get requests, you don't typically have a body, and normally don't have bodies because you don't need to send data. You usually send them with query params, but when you're creating an item by posting, you would be sending that item in the body. When you're editing it, you would be sending the edited item in the body. I'll give a visual example of this in a second, but it's important that I lay the foundation before I get there. All right, so this is a request, and the combination of all the requests to an API is kind of like a structured and documented way of talking to it. And all of these are typically documented when they're intended for public consumption. My example, my Appspotr example in this case, is take our data set as an example, where we have created a data set which holds items, a list of items, right? This data set has an identifying number that is unique in the system. So you can access it. You can say, hey, you, see, Appspotr, I just put Appspotr URL. Let's imagine appspotr.com/datasets and dataset 123. Hey, you, I want to get. And then that will the server will respond by sending back the items inside that dataset. If I do the same thing, but this time I say post, and I put an item, a new item in there, it will add a new item to the dataset. You see, it's like a remote control, where you're defining the buttons on the remote control, and then the car or the thing on the other side is gonna act. And then you have paths, right? So you can go one level deeper, and you can say, hey, in dataset 123, that this specific item, I would like to fetch it, just that one, or I would like to edit it, or I would like to delete it. And with this, you can do everything. You can do everything on dataset inside with items on a dataset. It's kind of the basis for it. Yeah, so let's just build something Appspotr with this. I will start by, it always starts by a bit of research when you're dealing with REST APIs. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for WordPress today, because most WordPress websites out there have an API that is enabled, a REST API that's enabled. Obviously, don't build an app using someone else's WordPress website without asking them about using it, because it is a public API. Anyone could call it, but I'm pretty sure most people would not like their data to be included in another app without their permission. So what I'm going to do in this scenario, we have a website for our app building team, Appspotr Studios, and this is a WordPress website, so it has a bunch of data. I'll use that to show you an example of what I mean. All right, so we'll do some research to find out about the API. We need to know the information on how to make the requests we're going to need to make. Then I will show you in Appspotr creating an integration, giving it a name, configuring it. And as a second step, we'll get into the app building part, where you want to fetch an item, you want to put it in a state, and you want to display a list of those items. All right, so it ends up being a 3-step process. So we'll start with our research, which I've already done for you. I found a website, which is WordPress. There are many ways to do this. There are also plugins. I have this plugin, which I haven't installed. There's a Chrome plugin, which can tell you what technology a website is using. Let me see if I can just quickly add it. Actually, I would have to go to the extension store, so I'll just leave it there. But there's a Appalizer Chrome extension. Why don't we just add it really quickly? Actually added it to the wrong one. There we go. This is something I use often. You might have another one. It essentially just looks at a website and tells you what the website is using. Let me pin that. There we go. Now if we go here and we refresh this page, it should, there we go. So WordPress is typically what you're looking for. I mean, if you are integrating your own website, you will know yourself that it's a WordPress website. In this case, I'm just trying to show you that it is. So every WordPress website works like this. You have a concept of posts. So you post articles typically because it's for information. And on our website, we have these case studies that were done. So there are 3 items that we can fetch. All right. And when I was talking earlier, I mentioned getting the base URL, getting the domain name, getting the path. So this is what it looks like. This is what the research part looks like. Next step is looking at the documentation on WordPress. So every system that has a REST API will have some sort of documentation. And here they have a REST API. And they have one that is called, I mean, you have a lot of things you can do with WordPress, comments, categories, block types. But I'm going to go to post because it's the easiest one to show an example really fast. You have what we call an endpoint, which is intended to fetch all the posts for a WordPress website. And if you scroll down here, they show you an example of, see, they say get, and they'll give you the path. So the actual full request base URL, you see example.com, is the website that you're looking for, the WordPress website. And then you see the second part is this, well, you have this extra piece here, WP JSON. Then you have this second part, which is the actual request to fetch the posts. Okay, so how do I test this, right? There's a few ways you can test it. You can just use your browser if you want. You can take, let's take the base, right? Nothing else. You copy this. This is the most basic way, but I'll show you a tool that's much better. You paste it here, and then you add the extra piece here. And what you'll see is a bunch of stuff that's just data, right? This is the actual data that is used to display these. You see? You'll see the article 40,000 and this. You see the text will be here. Here. But it has a bunch of symbols. So that's just to show you an example. What you actually want to be using, there are a few free tools available. There's the most popular one maybe is called Postman. It's a website or it's an app, up to you. And what it allows you to do is that it allows you to make these requests and save them so that you can use them later. It's kind of like a notebook where you can test it out. And once you're happy with it, once you've inspected it, you can go and implement it somewhere. So I like to use this because I like to research a bit how things work, and especially I want to see it in a more readable manner, that data that was coming back. I don't want this the jumble of symbols that I saw earlier. So what I did here is I created a new request in Postman. You see, you have many types, a lot of types, but it's just a GET request. I put my base URL. I added this little piece here that WordPress says is to access the API in JSON mode. And then I added this path here, which is the instruction to the server to say, hey, return me all the posts. And that's all it is. You click send. What comes back is the response from the WordPress website. And you see how much time it took and everything and the size. And these are the articles. So if I close them, you'll see there are 3. And the notation here is JSON. So if you're interested in this notation, it's a standard called JSON. And you can look it up as well. It describes items like I was talking about in data sets previously in the previous webinars, you see. So an item will have a bunch of properties. So you can see this post has an ID. 176 is the post. It has dates of when it was created. It has a link, so you can actually go to the article. Maybe you want to redirect them. You have the title here as text, and then you have the content of the article as markup. You see, and you even have an excerpt. So the short part of the article, if you don't want to show the full article, then you have an author ID. You have a bunch of other properties that we will not be focusing on today. I think I will just show an example of displaying the title, maybe, and putting a link so that it opens up the website. Yeah, so now that this works, and now that we're happy, I think we can move to Appspotr and start creating our integration. To speed things up today, what I did was I already created an app for a webinar, and I already configured something else on it just to jumpstart a bit. So where does this hide? You've seen this before, it's right here, integrations. All right, so I go there, it's under data. Integrations, it's blank as you can see. So we want to create a new integration. We want to call it, I guess, Appspotr Studios, because this is whatever name you want. And you see here, you have already the same terminology popping up. This is the part of the URL that will never change. So it's also up to you, but I'm just going to make it all of this, right? This first part, because you can do different types of requests, and it will have different paths, but this is the one that won't change. Right, so let's create it. And there we go. And now we're inside it. You see, and you can make as many as you want. You don't have to only connect to one system, right? You can connect to 5 different systems at the same time, and make an app that connects to 5 different systems at the same time. The important part to understand here is your app will be communicating with this website directly, not going through Appspotr at all, right? So if your users have data privacy issues and maybe they have their own system, if you make this integration between, well, you build this integration in Appspotr and you define everything, the app that the users have in their hand will make the request directly to the server and get the data. Nothing passes through Appspotr, right? So what I have here, I have an empty list because I need to create a method. What is a method? A method is what I was talking about. It's the request. So you can define a lot of things here, but we're going to keep it simple for this example, and then I'll add a bonus one after, which is a really cool one. So name, I like to typically say what it does. So get all posts would be nice, because that clearly tells me in 3 words what it does. And it also, well, maybe it's redundant because it has get in it, but I mean, why not? This, you can see we've already got this, right? Get and this part of it. And here you're kind of seeing the same terminology you've seen before. So we'll keep it at get, and you can see it get here, but we're missing the second part here. And now I put this here, and voila, you see. So we're seeing similar in Postman, similar to what we did up here as well, a get. The body you can configure, but there's no need to send the body. Inputs, nothing is coming in. Headers, our website does not require any headers. So API documentation will tell you when you need to provide headers, right? And usually they will, if it's a good API, it will provide you errors when stuff is missing, which you will be able to debug. But here we don't need to provide headers. What we do need to configure for our sake, though, is when the item comes back, where should it go? And this is outputs. So similar to how views work, when I showed you that a view can accept data inputs and a view can send data out of it, outputs, you do the same thing with the integrations, with methods and integrations. So a method can receive data. Let's say we wanted to put some variable here and make it come from somewhere else, from a calculation or from user input. You could do that. I'll make an example just in a few minutes to show you that. And then the main thing is, yeah, you're making a request to get something back, right? So you need to configure something. You have 2 buttons. One is to create, one is to test. Let's just test it. There we go. So it's the same jumble of symbols you saw before, but now the CMS did a similar thing to what this program does. And it fetched it for you. One thing we do that's a bit particular is we add an extra layer here. We wrap the data inside a property. All right. So what you end up having to do here is say, okay, Similar to views, similar to when you have logic blocks and you're passing data out, this data, you need to give, first of all, you need to give an output, a name. So I'm going to call it what I'm expecting, right? Posts, because I expect that get all posts should return posts. The data type will be, you can have different types of data, but it's a list. And response key, this is where it's a bit tricky. You have a lot of properties here. You have a lot of potential things that could come from potential APIs. We do not know your APIs. We do not know all the APIs. So you need to write where it is. Where is the data? So I think it's in body. That should how you test it. Yeah. All right. Posts. You see, and this is a way to outputs is a way to test what output, like what's the actual output that you're going to get before creating. You could also retrieve only the first item and maybe the date. And how that would work is, again, maybe developers would be used to this, but dot notation. So dot 0, because items in lists, the first item is a 0, the first item, and then you see date, right? So let's try and fetch this. It might be a bit unhappy that it's fetching something that's not a list. And you see, I fetched first post's date with this. All right, so this is how it works. You're giving the path to where the data is inside what's coming back from the server. Obviously, this doesn't make sense. I was just trying to show you. So you could also put ID instead. See, let's see, and it should be 176. See, 176. So you see, I went into the first item here. There's 3 items, and I fetched the ID. I could put the second item, and that would return the number of the second item. You see. So what I'm going to leave it as body because it's perfect. It's exactly what I need. It's the list of items. And then I click create. Do not worry about the other properties. Create. And now you'll see it kind of describes what it is. You can go inside and edit it again, but we know that it works because we've tested it first outside and then inside Appspotr. We created an integration. We've created a method. Next step will be to just set up my view and my state to accommodate for this. So what happens here is we are fetching data, right? That's all we're doing, fetching it. But then we need to do something. We need to display a list. And we saw that we displayed lists by designing a list view and putting that on the patchwork. So we need to do that. And then we need to keep this data somewhere so that the list view can show it. So we'll create a state for that. So first point of order is creating a state that can store my posts. Right? So I'll create, again, use names that make sense to you. Use whatever you want, but it's nice naming things so that it's obvious what they are. Posts. Could have also called it Appspotr Studio Posts if you have many different integrations. So it's a list. This will store my data. And then we need to design a view, a list view for this that can match the data inside. Okay. The tricky part for list views, when you're doing it manually like this. So what we did with data sets last time was, hey, we create a data set, we designed the list view, and it just shows the data, right? But in this case, we have no idea of knowing what's coming out, right? Every API is different. So what you have to keep in mind when you're making a list view is you need to create inputs that match the item that's coming back, right? That match the actual list view will display the actual list will display multiple items, but the list view will show one item. So you need to think about what are the standard set of properties that each item has and define those as inputs. You don't need to define all of them. You define the ones you want. So in our case, if you look at what an article looks like, right? It has a bunch of things. And I told you I wanted to display the title and I wanted to display maybe we can display the date. Why not, right? Then I would define those two. You see? All right. But you need to see the data type. That's maybe also a bit trickier. This is a number, this is a string. And then you see here, this is not just, title is not just a piece of text. It's actually an item with another property inside. And you see here, excerpt is kind of that as well. It's an item with two properties inside. It has rendered, which is text, or in this case, rich text. And it has protected, which is a Boolean, right? So you need to think about these things. And let's move on to make a view with this in mind. Let's make a new view list this time. And so this time we're doing all this manually. Post. So this is how a post will be displayed. Blank, no inputs, right? What did I say I wanted to show? The title, right? The title. Tempted to put text, but actually what's going to come back, remember, is an item. It's a JSON, right? It's actually a piece of text like this. Next thing is date, which is actually a date. So that works out, I think. And you see, you need to match the names. These are actually the names. If you're not sure, what is an item, what is a list, the rule of thumb is a square bracket defines the start of a list, you see? And then, let me close everything. And then curly bracket defines an item. You always have an opening and a closing, opening and a closing. See? I can open only one. Yeah, I can't really close everything, but I can close here. If I just close content, you see? There's always an opening and a closing. That makes the difference between the two, you see? We're designing list views to display lists, and inside the list, you will have a single item and access to that item itself. So we're trying to define now what we want to show from the item. So I am going to show date and I'm going to show title. And that's why I put date and title. And then from then onwards, it's the same as what we've done before. It actually ends up that we can just use, I guess, two text components. Why not? That's easy. And let's put the top title. This is where it gets a bit tricky. Remember how I was saying that if you want to access something that's inside something, you type where it is. So where is the actual text that we want to show? It's inside title, inside rendered, you see? This is how WordPress does it. This is a standard for WordPress. They nest it like this. So I need to do title and then rendered. And how we do that is the same as how we did it before. You have to do it like this, you see? The dot means go one level deeper. So title, go one level deeper, rendered. All right, I'm getting warnings that my audio was disconnected, but I think it still seems to be working, so I'll continue. So title, technically that should be there. Let's quickly add some font, why not, and make it bold. And then at the bottom, we will have date. There we go. Date is easier because date is just showing up like this. All right. There we go. We have our list view, we have our state, and now it's the same thing as last time, sort of, but there's an extra step. So we have our list of posts there. I guess posts now. Let's put it down here. So I've already built something else to show you guys later. Let's make posts the first item so we can test it. This is the app. Let's refresh it. All right, and it's empty, strange. But we're actually not fetching anything, we're not displaying anything, so nothing going. All right. So no, nothing is shown, but we have chosen post. That's strange. It's because we don't have a list source. And also there's no data set to select. This time we should select the state I created earlier, you see? So still nothing's gonna happen. What this says is the list should come from posts, right? The posts from state, right? But there's nothing in it because we haven't put anything inside the state. So now is when we start using our integration. So what happens when this list loads, I should, if I'm just gonna say it in English, when this page loads, I should fetch the items from my WordPress website, and then I should put them inside the post state. And that technically should display them, right? So let's do that. Where do my, how do I use integrations on the patchwork? The methods that you create inside an integration. So if I go back to integrations, take a step back, integration name Appspotr Studios, inside has a method called getAllPosts. If I go to the patchwork and I go to add patch, if you scroll all the way down, you can also search, you'll see there's a new section now. It's like you've built a custom logic block, you see? It's called integration Appspotr Studios getAllPosts. So you just click it and it's there. So when this gets triggered, it will make that request we saw earlier, and then success will have the posts inside. Next thing to do is state. So this one I just always search set state because I want to set it inside. So there's a lot of little blobs here, but remember last time on patch load, when the page loads, fetch, and then when it succeeds, whoop, let's go inside. So after we fetch when it succeeds, you can set it to posts, see? So the getAllPosts, output posts are gonna go into state. At this point in time, it should work. If I've designed my list view properly and everything, it should just work. Like magic. Like magic, you see? This is the title. Well, we don't see the date in this case, but I guess I can go here and there might be a date. I guess they're not showing it, but this is the first article, second article, and you see third article. The good thing about this is that every single WordPress website in the world has this type of API with the same structure and the same behavior. So you could technically design the post yourself in your app. When you tell this to customers or to your clients, they might expect that you're completely transforming their WordPress website into an app. It's a bit different. It's like you're integrating the app that you're building into the WordPress website. You see? So this is how we go from a REST API request to fetch data from a server into our app. You see? And it only took 2 logic blocks to do that. The complicated part, the most complicated part is understanding how you should configure this. But in theory, when it's defined nicely, which is a really nice documentation here, they will break it down like this for you and give you an example. And then there are arguments. So there's a lot of other things, like if you want to order by date, if you want to fetch something, filter something, there are different arguments you can pass in this request as well to make to change what is coming back from the server, right? But you see here, I created an output called posts. That's the reason we get on this connection something called post that we can select, because we have said that when I fetch this integration, there will be posts coming out of type list. And then the system automatically detects that, oh, okay, that means it can be set inside a state. All right. So there we go. It takes 1 patch and 2 logic blocks to fetch items from a WordPress website. You see? I'm wondering if that does cover everything. Yes, it does cover everything from this part. I know I skipped a few steps in here, but those other steps are covered in previous webinars.